and Warriors, we're drinking it down. Raise your voices and stir up this town. We're the champions of craft beer sport. Tolkien Audio, we hold down the fort.
Hello, good listener. Welcome inside a brand new edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Matt Robinson, as always, along with you today. Thank you for joining me. We'll let you know right up front, it is just me for this one, and it'll be just a quick one. And I know I say that sometimes. This one, honestly, I wasn't even sure whether to do it. I was sort of waiting around, hoping more news on something would break, kind of give me a second topic here, and it didn't. So wasn't sure whether to go ahead, but this is just it. Man, it's been on my mind for a while, and we'll get into the specifics here in a second. I want to hear what you think about it. Let me know on social media, at Tall Can Audio, whether you're on Blue Sky or Twitter, Instagram, wherever you are. We want to hear from you over there. I will have a pint. We're not going to spend much time on it because it's, well, as you guys know, often when I'm out of the studio, I am down kind of lakeside, which means often I will end up at Old Flame Brewing Company out of Port Perry. This is their red. That's it. Just red. That's all it's called. I've had it a bunch of times on the show before. It's just a red. And I say that like it's a bad thing. It certainly is not a bad thing. But it is everything you would expect out of a red. I don't need to beat this over the head because you guys have heard about it enough times. So that's what we're riding with here today as we get into this. And man, just because I've talked about it a bunch of times before doesn't mean I don't enjoy it every time. Look, I wish I'd have been able to get into this a little more with Kevin Mickey on the Monday show. Thanks to him. If you missed that, Sportsnet's Kevin Mickey was here. tallcanaudio.com or wherever you're hearing me right now. It is the next one down on the list. We did manage to get into a whole bunch of stuff. And we touched on this subject a little bit, and I'm not going to keep teasing it. In fact, it was in the show title, so you already know why you're here. I got some things to say about the PWHL. And like I said, I wish I'd have been able to get into it more with Mickey, but we had a little technical difficulty in the recording setup that I was running. And the call kind of dropped twice halfway through. And as I was trying to sew it together, I was cutting out some of his good points. And I was cutting out some of my good points. You know, you get that crazy internet sound where it starts to break up on you. You all know the sound, like when you're halfway through a Skype call and you can see somebody's face is still moving, but you can't really hear them anymore. That's what we were getting. And Kevin's would have been a really interesting perspective to have as a guy who works part-time for the league. You know, his full-time gig is over at Sportsnet, but he does work for the Toronto Scepters. And in some ways, that would have been a really good perspective to get. I think on this subject, it would have been fine. In other ways, some of you often criticize me for this sort of thing, for bringing in people who are too close to the subject. One of our longtime friends of the show, Chris Hoffley, used to work for communications for Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, the Red Blacks, the 67s. And inevitably, after he would be on the show, and we'd have a good time, we'd have a good laugh, we'd talk about a lot of things, not all of it under the OSEG banner, but when you've got that guy in here, you're going to ask about the 67s, you are going to ask about the Red Blacks, and someone would show up in my mentions, like, well, what's the PR guy going to say? Obviously, that wasn't very objective. Well, you're not wrong, but there is a little bit of listener responsibility to that. When I tell you right up front, this is the PR guy for OSEG, it should dawn on you, he's probably going to do some PR. He's probably going to do some spin. And look, Hoffley was honest enough, but it was always with a pro-OSEG spin, and that was fine. You know what you're getting when you have their communications guy in. It's been interesting that he's been in here a couple of times, in here, like I'm in the studio. I'm not in the studio still. He's been on the show several times now since leaving OSEG, and some of his opinions now are a little more unfettered, is a fun word. But it doesn't mean he's not a good guest. It doesn't mean he's not fun to have around. It doesn't mean he can't offer you some insights. It doesn't mean I don't want his opinions on other things. It does mean you got to know going into it who you're speaking to. So as it pertains to this conversation about the PWHL, I think talking to Kevin Mickey about the expansion process and how this has played out and what it's done to the original 6 franchises would have been interesting. What did it feel like around the arena when you're talking to people? What were people saying there? Do I expect he would have buried the league for it? No. He works for the league. Guy's not crazy. Does that mean what he had to say wouldn't have been interesting? No, it doesn't. He still would have had some tremendous insights. Point being, as we were going through and recording the conversation, that was where we had some technical difficulties. It ended up getting edited out of the show. That's my bad for the setup we were running here, and just had some connection issues, and that portion of the show was lost. But that doesn't mean this was still not on my mind. And I did and in some ways, maybe it's better that I had to wait to get this out. We talked to Kevin Mickey late Sunday night. We had already seen the PWHL signing period go on, but we hadn't yet seen the actual expansion draft. And that happened on Monday evening, scheduled up against a Stanley Cup final game. Look, sometimes these things are unavoidable. You schedule things ahead of time, and then somebody else's league schedule sort of falls where it does in a way you wish you hadn't. That sucked. Maybe it was unavoidable. You'd have preferred to not see that happen up against the Stanley Cup final, but it is what it is. But when I spoke to Mickey on Sunday night, we didn't yet know the results of the expansion draft, and now we do. We know what this has done to each of the teams. We know what Vancouver and Seattle will be starting up with before free agency opens, before the draft opens, the entry draft, that is. So maybe in some small way, it's better that we had to wait to do this. I gotta say, this stunk. And I'm going to criticize the league. And it's okay. It's okay to do that. I have to preface this a little bit. Because, as if we haven't already done like 6 minutes of prefacing things. Look, I had a guest lined up for, I don't know, probably 2 weeks ago. Somewhere in that neighborhood. And they asked a couple days beforehand for a topic list. Some guests do this and some don't. It's totally reasonable. They want to know, especially if they've never been on the show before, which was the case with this guest. What are we going to be getting into here, in case they want to research a little bit and just, have some time to collect their thoughts. It's all totally reasonable. Lots of guests don't. People who've been here many times before, if it's Strides, if it's Bunda, people like that, Hoffley, I'm just like, yeah, you know what? The Stanley Cup finals are going on, and CFL season's kicking off. There'll be plenty there, and yeah, that's enough. They'll come in and we can take off from that point. But a new guest going on a new show often will ask for specific topics. And so in this case, I had said I wanted to talk about the drop-off in PWHL attendance from the regular season to the playoffs, because this is the second straight year that had happened. It's not across the board. It's not for every game, but average attendance in the playoffs dropped for a second straight year from what they were getting in the regular season. There's a bunch of different things that go into that. Stanley Cup playoffs are going on, and some teams had brutal schedules up against their NHL teams, like playing at literally the same time. That's not going to work. Sometimes just hockey season's over. We're into May and June, and you're still playing when in January or February is when people are thinking about going to hockey games. You would also just taken another big, long international break for the Women's World Hockey Championships. There's lots of reasons why attendance might be falling off, and frankly, that's why I wanted to have that conversation. But this particular guest wrote back and said, everything else is fine. I'm not sure how bad I really want to get into the attendance thing. It sort of feels like picking on them. So, well, it's not picking on them. And frankly, it was an excuse to boast, because Ottawa was not experiencing that attendance fall off. In fact, they set a new, I was going to say all-time high. I think it was an all-time high for TD Place. They did play that game out at Canadian Tire Center, which obviously would have drawn more. But Ottawa seemed to be bucking the trend, and that was another thing I wanted to talk about. Why is this happening across the league, and why does Ottawa seem to be immune to it? And they just weren't having any of it. They didn't want to talk about it. It felt like, to them, it was punching down. It was picking on the league. And that kind of talk makes me fucking crazy. Because these are legitimate things. We're 2 years into this league now. The players themselves said after like the first couple weeks of the league's existence in year one, yeah, you know what? We get it. It's a nice story That's going to be part of the spin as we're getting started is, hey, good for you. And what does it feel like to have your own league? And how momentous is all this? The players, after a very short time, are like, hey, enough. Time to talk about the penalty kill. Time to talk about why, Toronto's top line isn't getting it done, or why Boston might need help on the back end, or is Toronto's defense. I don't know why I went to Toronto's twice, but talk hockey things like you do about other leagues, and that's fine. And once we get to that point, we have to be able to be real. Why is playoff attendance suffering is not punching down on a league when the Ottawa Senators were run by a fucking... Let's be careful here. Don't need to speak ill of the dead. When the Ottawa Senators were in their dark period and attendance was suffering because of it, everybody talked about it because it was a reasonable thing to talk about. When the Toronto Argonauts moved from the Dome to BMO and everyone said, hey, good idea, that was reasonable to talk about. And when it didn't work, everyone was like, why didn't it work? Why is attendance still bad? And that was reasonable to talk about. When the Ottawa Red Blacks had like the best home game day vibes and this, really loyal fan base that was showing up every week, that was reasonable to talk about. When the Red Blacks stunk for too long and that attendance started to suffer, that was reasonable to talk about. So when you, for back-to-back years, are setting attendance records in this new league and then attendance goes off a cliff in the playoffs, it's reasonable to talk about. That isn't saying women's hockey will never draw. That isn't saying this league is a failure. These are reasonable things to talk about in the context of a league. So I ended up just waving off the interview. I was just like, it was clear then, if we can't even have that conversation, that this is going to be pointless. We don't need to protect this league. It's doing very well. In fact, it's expanding. If we can't point out when one or two things aren't going perfectly and discuss why that might be, then it's just not a show I really want to do. So that interview ended up falling through. All that is to say, I'm going to criticize the league again today, and it's going to be okay. I still got my hoodie. I still got my hat. I still got my jersey. I'll still be at games next year. Man, how many times have I come on here and roasted the Blue Jays or the Maple Leafs or whoever? I'm still there the next day watching. So I think it's reasonable to point out that this expansion process sucked. This sucked. And it's really hard when you're expanding from 6 to 8 teams and you don't want to suddenly drop 2 terrible teams into the league that throw off the balance, and you do have reasonably good parity across the original 6. You don't want 2 terrible new teams coming in and asking those fans to just eat it for a few years until they can figure it out. But this league is only 2 years old. And for the first year, you didn't have jerseys. Did anybody criticize that? It came up. It was a talking point. But the counter argument, which was totally reasonable, was, you know what? We could have spent another year not playing and got logos and got colors and got team names. But it would have been another year where these women don't have a place to play and aren't making a living doing what they do. So maybe we just play for 1 year under our city names and figure it out later, and we can get this thing going. And anyone being halfway reasonable about the subject went, yeah, you know what? Good call. So we go through year 1 like that. And then we get the names. We get the jerseys. And people buy them in droves. If you're watching PWHL games on TV, you can see them around the arenas. And all those people who were with you through year 1 and then were stoked in year 2 to get team gear and were thrilled at Christmas to get their jersey with Sarah Nurse on the back or Hillary Knight on the back. It's gone. Those jerseys are now collector's items. And look, we all get it. If you're an NHL fan, an NFL fan, whatever, sometimes your guy gets traded. But nobody thought Sarah Nurse was leaving Toronto or Hillary Knight was leaving Boston. This cut deep. And my problem with it, again, I understand you needed to give these two teams a real chance and a decent roster. So my issue isn't that it wasn't going to cut deep, certainly deeper than us as fans of these original 6 franchises wanted, but it cut deep, and it cut deep aimlessly. There was no strategy. There was no reason given. Like, there was no thought process put into what you're going to give up. If you had said, look, we want all these original 6 teams who have now drafted in our first 2 entry drafts to be able to keep their young players in-house, develop them into players who are going to help down the road, and to allow that to happen, we will allow teams to lose a Sarah Nurse or a Hillary Knight or an Emrans Mashmeyer. Some big names with some star value that will sell tickets in these new markets and help these teams right away. If that had been the stated goal, the understanding that this is where we're going, and the rules reflect that it's going to be easier to protect young players than it is to protect veterans, you go, all right, well, that sucks, but there is a strategy here. Or if the opposite had happened, hey, you know what? We understand everybody just went and bought themselves their brand new Sarah Nurse jersey. These are stars. These are name value players that now exist in these markets. We don't want them leaving. These are players that were signed. And remember, at the very beginning of the league, everyone was allowed to sign 3 free agents before the draft. Brianne Jenner is staying. Sarah Nurse is staying. Hillary Knight is staying. And we will allow these expansion teams to kind of have free reign on your young, just drafted players who haven't yet established themselves. And those players can go out west and develop in these new cities with these new fan bases and become stars in those markets. That would have been fine. But you just threw the doors open completely and said, take whatever you want. And there's no more perfect example of that than Toronto, who lost all of their top 3 draftees from the 2024 entry draft and Sarah Nurse. You took their future and you took their marquee. You took their biggest star, Natalie Spooner, notwithstanding, perhaps, and you took their future. That sucks. How is Toronto supposed to recover from that? In Ottawa, you lost 2 of your top 4 D and the player you drafted second overall last year, not even a calendar year ago. And this stuff carries across the board. New York, who's been in last place both of the first 2 years, lost their number 1 center and a top-line winger. They can't afford to lose that. Like, this was too much. I don't know how, like, maybe it's as simple as the rules are you can only protect 3 players, which was the stated goal, and anyone that you drafted last year can't be taken. Like, I'm pissed about Danielle Serdachny taken second overall by Ottawa, but I don't have much of a leg to stand on because everyone except New York lost their first round pick from last year. Sarah Fillier went first overall to New York. New York, quite smartly, protected her. 2 through 6 in that draft, all those players are gone to either Seattle or Vancouver. Why'd you even bother with an entry draft last year? And I get it, not all of this was on the table when you had the draft last year. You didn't know for sure expansion was coming. You didn't know for sure what the rules were going to be. As we sit here right now, I'm recording this on Tuesday night. They don't know what the rules for this year's entry draft are going to be, and it's less than 2 weeks away. They wanted to wait and see how the expansion draft part went. What? So your original 6 franchises who've been doing this for 2 years and trying to plan and see, they don't know yet what order they're drafting in. Is Vancouver going before me? Or are they being held to the end? This is coming together too haphazardly. And as I said, going into year 1, no team names, no logos. Where's my team going to play? What's the schedule going to look like? This all happened at the last second, and it felt haphazard, but we were all excited. We wanted it to happen. So you look the other way and you go, just get them on the ice. I get it. We're 2 years into this now, and that's not good enough anymore. You can't announce the expansion draft rules less than a month away from the expansion draft, and you certainly can't have all your league not knowing yet what the draft order is when it's 2 weeks away. Again, that's for the entry draft. There's too many drafts right now. This has been mishandled, guys. This wasn't good. And it was just, and look, maybe some of you are sitting there right now saying, I'm just upset because we lost too much. Well, we did, but so did every other team in the league. There was a better way to find this balance. And like I said, maybe it was no more complicated than protect 3, like everyone had to do anyway, and you also get to keep all your draft picks from last year. Not even both years. Not even from 2 years ago. Just last year. Or set some sort of age limit. Because some of these people being drafted, obviously, who just weren't in the league, maybe they're 28 or 30 coming over from Europe, or coming out of college at 25, whatever it might be. Anybody under 24 who you drafted last year gets to stay. And even that maybe is an arbitrary cutoff, because a lot of these players are coming out of university. Like, I think Fillier and Serdachny are both around 24 when they came out of university. You know, I keep using Toronto as an example. You lost your first 3 draft picks from last year and Sarah Nurse. Maybe the biggest star in the league. One of them, top 3, top 5, no lower than that. So you crushed their future, and you crushed their ability to sell a ticket this year, and you crushed the fans who had already rushed out to buy their Sarah Nurse jersey. In Ottawa, maybe it's a little different. I got a jersey for Christmas. It's a cool gift. No name on the back. I spoke to somebody in January. He said, if you're going to put one on the back right now, who would it be? You sort of kick it around. Everybody loves Clarkey. Everybody loves Mashmeyer. But in my head, I think what I said was, I'm all in on Danielle Serdachny. You're still riding the high of her scoring that overtime winner for Canada at World Championships the summer before, or the spring before, whatever you want to call it. And she ends up in Ottawa, number 2 overall pick, all the talent in the world. If I'd have rushed out in January and put Danielle Serdachny on the back of my brand new Ottawa Charge jersey, and then I see what just happened, what did that do for my fandom? And I'm a 40-year-old man. Suck it up. Go get a new jersey. What about the kid who got one for Christmas? What about the kid that absolutely got a Hillary Knight jersey for Christmas? It bothers me that this all felt so haphazard. That there was no, you should be able to point at the rules when they come out and go, I see what you're doing here. I see what types of players are going to disappear. Overpaid veterans who, overpaid is a funny term that we can use in the NHL. Maybe he's not quite fair yet in the PWHL. Highly paid veterans relative to their league who have bigger names, but maybe would be best served trying to sell a new market. Those players are going to be available while the existing teams are able to hold on to a few more of their young kids. Maybe that makes sense. And that probably is the one that would make the most sense, even though it goes against my jersey argument for the kid who would have just got the Hillary Knight or the Sarah Nurse. But those players have helped build up fans in the original 6 markets, and now maybe they can help us do the same in the new 2. But we're not going to damage these existing franchises by having them give up all their picks. Okay, I can get on board with that. Or it's the opposite. These fan bases have grown attached to these stars. We're not going to take them away already. We would rather let smart hockey people in Vancouver and Seattle grab at the soft underbelly of young players that are going to be stars but haven't quite popped yet that can do that in their new markets. You go, okay, that makes sense. You can't have both. You can't have a team lose its biggest star and its first 3 draft picks from last year. That sucks. That's not right. It's not right. I don't want to go any more high and mighty about it than that. But I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is that this is not an uncommon reaction for fans of this league, and it is a very uncommon talking point in sports media because we don't want it to feel like we're picking on the league. Well, I don't sit here feeling like I'm picking on the PWHL. I'm a fan. But I will criticize them when I feel like they messed up, and they messed this up. Instead of having a clearly defined set of parameters for how this draft was going to play out, they just forced everybody to throw their doors open. You can make an argument that Seattle and Vancouver are both going to be in the top 4 in terms of favorites for the championship next year. I think we want these teams to be competitive. I'm not sure we want them to be the favorites. I don't know, man. I didn't like this. I watched how these teams were getting gutted through the signing period last week. I watched Ottawa, with literally the very first 2 picks in the expansion draft on Monday night, lose 2 top 4 defense. You're like, well, at least the bleeding's over. Ottawa had reached their maximum amount of players that could be taken. But the team had been torn apart. And they weren't the only ones. New York could not afford to lose what they lost. It was too much. I don't have the perfect solution other than the one that I've already offered up. 3 players minus, a recent draftee who's under such and such years of age. Maybe not even all of them. 3 players off your roster and 1 or 2 under a certain age or something like that. But these teams, man, they took heavy body blows, almost every one of them. Some were more able to withstand it. Like any other league, you have better depth in some places than others. But man, I look around, like New York is not coming out of the basement anytime soon. They were already a last place team and they got gutted. Ottawa's rep was depth on the back end. I think they got 2 defenders under contract right now. One of them's 37-year-old Joss Larocque. This just bugged me. So maybe you feel like I'm being too heavy-handed on this. Maybe it is just me who thinks that we're handling this league with kid gloves a little too much. But I think if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to be a serious business, if you're going to be in pro sports, you get to be criticized when you make mistakes. And I think they made mistakes. It doesn't necessarily mean my opinion is correct. I'd love to hear what you guys think. But this was too much. Like I said, looked around for another topic. I don't know. I could talk about the Stanley Cup final. There's only been 1 game since Mickey and I talked about the first 2 between the Panthers and the Oilers, and I don't want to talk about Game 3. It was a shit show. Yeah, the third period was stupid, but it was over before that. I don't want to hear about officiating. They called us for too many men and they didn't call them. Yeah, theirs was in double overtime. Yours was in the first period. Are you new here? You ever watched playoff hockey before? Guess which one's getting called. Plus, you had 2 extra guys on the ice. Get over it. Are the Oilers unraveling? I don't know. I probably wouldn't keep trying to fight the Panthers. That's embarrassing. But they showed up not ready to play in the first period of Game 3, and they took 4 penalties. You're going to play half the first period shorthanded? Yeah, it's not going to go good. The Panthers aren't just goons. Yeah, they're dirty. This is what they do. Everyone in the East has been watching it for 2 years now. And really, the Oilers saw it last year a little bit in the final. But they're not just dirty. They are good. They are talented. I guess the only one that would perhaps really get my goat up if I was an Oiler fan is the Arvidsson on Bobrovsky goalie interference, where Bobrovsky cartwheeled into the third row to try and sell that call after the Panthers have been, well, I was going to say the Panthers, mostly Bennett, has been delivering swanton bombs onto Skinner and Freddie Anderson and Anthony Stolars. That would bug me. But that's what they do. They bug you, and then you get pissed off, and then they score on the power play. Figure it out. or lose like the rest of us. Those are your choices. So I really don't have a whole lot to say on Game 3. It was over after the first period. If you're going to take 4 penalties in the first, you're going to have a bad time. I don't think the series is over. I don't think the Oilers have imploded or unraveled. I think it's stupid. There's 2 days off in between when you're just sitting there in Miami. That all really bugs me. I probably would have scheduled a PWHL expansion draft for one of those empty nights, but it's a different thing. I don't know. We'll see what happens in Game 4. I expect the Oilers to be better. I don't know that means they win, but I expect them to be better. Scotty Mack on the show next. He'll complain less than I did tonight. I think. I can't say for sure what Scotty's going to want to talk about. But we haven't caught up with him in a while, so that's going to be fun. Looking forward to talking to Scott MacArthur about all kinds of stuff. We'll see what's on his mind here on the next edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Thank you so much for checking out this one. And like I said, it's one of those things you do when you host a podcast. You make sure you throw out the social handles, tell people you want to hear from them, and you mean it. I do like hearing from you guys about what's going on. But this is one of those specifically that I'd love to hear what you guys think. Am I overstating my displeasure for how this expansion draft played out? Is it more fair than I'm making it out to be, and this is just the cost of doing business with a league this young? Or did they cut too deep and ask existing fan bases to pay too high of a price to bring these new 2 teams in? On that note, let's get out of here. Go finish the rest of this old flame. When I do these shows, just me, I don't get to sip my beer as often as I want. There's nobody else to talk across the table, give me a chance to have a swig. So I'm going to go do that. And we will talk to you next time with Scott MacArthur. Thanks so much for listening. My name is Matt Robinson. Have a great day.
Yo, Warriors been drinking it down.